Right now. Hey,
Hey, how's it
I was
going?
just good. I was just saying I dropped off my assistant Kirsten at the DFW airport, which was just absolutely dead. Although it's one of the 13 locations where people are coming from Europe to America, and there was up to 7-hour lines that people were pretty upset about in terms of screening for them coming back in the US. But in terms of people
Yeah.
traveling in the US or traveling out of the US, it was pretty much dead. And even my roads when I was driving around Dallas today, probably 80% less traffic. And I did go into Walmart. I was just curious. And, there was actually, it wasn't like decimated like I've seen some pictures, like, but anything to do with like cold, flu, antiseptic, antibacterial, wipes and all that stuff, all gone. Like there was not a single product, not a single cold medicine, not a single wipe or, anything left. So that was weird. But
Yeah. In Austin, people are having to go to like three locations to get toilet paper. Yeah, my husband did a couple errands on Friday, like just random. We had a dinner gathering, so we needed some limes, like, some random things. And he said it was that like palpable, and I haven't been to many places. I was just at a friend's house last night and whatnot, but the anxiety is very palpable. There's a very intense energy of potential unknown and doom and fear. And I think that that's a really important space for us to help people navigate, because fear and stress can only further inhibit your immune system. And I think, unfortunately, the media is really just focusing on statistics, pandemic spread, and numbers, a lot of quantitative data versus qualitative information on how your immune system works, what's the difference of innate versus acquired immune system, how do we support those things, and what are some tools. So it's been an interesting ride in a
yes,
wellness perspective, okay, trying to provide tools. Hopefully we can do that today a little bit.
yes, absolutely. And I actually want for people, I mentioned you a little bit before you got on, but for people that don't know Allie Miller, the rock star, who is Allie Miller?
I am a registered dietitian, and my background is in naturopathic medicine. I went to a naturopathic college, Bastyr University. So I practice functional integrative medicine, and the foundation of all of my protocols is food as medicine, both the marriage of equal importance of removing pro-inflammatory, gut destroying, hormone imbalancing foods and what I like to call chemical shitstorms. And then focusing on the latter end, the double-edged sword of getting the abundance of foods that are anti-inflammatory, that enhance a robust microbiome. And my husband just brought me a mug of foam broth. So if this
Oh,
isn't love,
nice.
I don't know what is. Yeah, so things that enhance your immune system, things that enhance the microbiome, are dense in nutrients, help to support detoxification. And so what I really kind of break it down to, that I hope people start to understand, is that our body requires biochemical reactions for all of its function. And every single biochemical reaction in the body, as Shawn and I know and preach constantly, require various nutrients that the body knows what to do with, understands, and requires for optimal function. And so when you're coming at food and targeted nutritional supplements, you're working upstream. You're really providing something that the body knows what to do, knows how to use, and creating a really thought through supportive plan that can yield clinical outcomes.
Yeah, and there's a few aspects here of dealing with what's going on right now, and I feel like only one of them is being dealt with, and it's more on the fear side of the equation of, how do we protect ourselves from coronavirus? And yes, hand washing is great, and keeping the respiratory tract moist is great, and potentially if you are at risk, like you have respiratory issues, you're elderly, you're immunocompromised, social distancing, those kinds of things we're all hearing about. but we're not hearing about that it's fear lowers the immune system, that it's good to have a healthy interaction with the global microbiome, like with pets, with dirt, with other people, with all these things. And it's not good to constantly use these antibacterial wipes and rubs and all this stuff, like, because it's killing your positive bacteria, your good flora. And it's fine to, clean surfaces and all that, especially if you're flying or whatever. I get that. But we're not hearing about, some of these other things. Like I'm saying, like, we're not hearing about that you should get sunshine, that you should laugh, that you should, de-stress, not watch the news that much, that you should watch a funny movie with your family and connect. And then we're not hearing about, like, ways to boost the immune system with diet, with supplements, with all these other things. And it's frustrating that it all seems kind of fear-driven right now, and it's just kind of exacerbating the potential health of the population that is at risk.
Yeah. Well, and I would even argue further to say, we're not talking about how to defend against, we're talking about how to defend against exposure, and we're talking about defending against getting infected, but we're not talking about how to defend the body against the pathophysiology, and we're not talking about how to support resilience, and that's the thing. It's like, 70% of us very likely will get it. So let's flip the script into what we can do about it. And there's so many research compounds out there that have support on multi-mechanistic influences in the body. And that's really where we need to start shifting our conversation, because like you said, there's the hygiene hypothesis, and we see that sterility, the reason why we have so many antibiotic resistant organisms is because the irresponsible, I would say, over prescription of antibiotics, and the use of prophylactic antibiotics in confined animal farming. So there's this disconnect in science where we're trying to get ahead of something. And my big post today was like, it's all about terrain. It's not about the virus it's the new kid on the block this year, but we're talking about SARS and COVID too being very comparable, and we're just talking, a decade away. And so it's not about identifying the particular compound pathogen, be it bacteria, virus, whatnot. It's about supporting the terrain of the individual so that their immune system is able to upregulate the correct inflammatory processes, check and balance those inflammatory processes, support white blood cell production, work with, again, both the innate and acquired immunity. And there's awesome research that shows things like probiotics do both. Probiotics actually support on a barrier defense. Probiotics actually support by upregulating natural killer cells. Probiotics regulate macrophage activity. This is all in that innate scope. And then you look at research studies, those same strains of probacteria actually work with the toll-like receptors in your epithelial of your gut, aiding in acquired immune system function. So there's no drug out there right now. A vaccine only works that one acquired pathway with one particular compound, and it's not going to flip as the mutation of the virus does. That's why we're constantly throwing the dart for the flu vaccine and sometimes totally missing the mark.
Exactly. So, going back to how we improve our immune system, which again, I feel like I haven't seen a single article. I've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles on the coronavirus, on social distancing, on cleaning your hands and things like that. That's great that we're, getting better hygiene practices, using 20-second hand washing. That's all great. But we're not getting a whole lot of conversation on boosting the immune system, or just how to reduce stress. Like the idea of allostatic load, let's say, like where, you have this bucket that you can tap into to deal with stress, and that bucket can be larger if you have positive hormetic stress, right? Like that you have eustress. That your body's getting exposed to some of these things at a certain level, and it's making you stronger. Be it like going to the gym or doing a cold shower or being exposed to some bacteria or viruses.
Right.
at a certain level can make you stronger. And obviously there's a threshold where it can be counterproductive. But, we're not hearing these ideas of how to improve our immune system so that we can better deal with these things and build up antibodies and things like that. So what are your thoughts in terms of like some of the best tips to improve the immune system? I mean, one, with things to avoid, and then two, things to do.
Yeah. So, avoidance, the big thing is excessive frequency of consumption. So if we're constantly eating and we're grazing during this time, that's not going to be optimal for immune function. We know that fasting and its research, I know you did a big thing yesterday, the benefits of autophagy and our immune system getting into that parasympathetic space, able to optimize its digestive processes. When we're not digesting in parasympathetic, we're going to optimize our body's immune function. And so that's a big one to watch for kids too, I would say, as a mom.
Yeah.
Constantly we're like shoving food in their face, or they just are constantly snacking. There's like a snack on the table at all times, like really focus, I would say, managed timing of meals, and aim to incorporate like a 16-8 if you can. You may even consider a couple prolonged fasts, but to mention on allostatic load, be mindful that fasting itself is a stressor as well. So what's your kind of full on bank account of what's all going on? And then based on what you are eating, I would definitely watch glycemic index and blood sugar. Refined carbohydrates, unfortunately, I used to always tease that like the word stressed spelled backwards is desserts. And, because of cortisol being a glucocorticoid, our primary stress hormone, does have blood sugar influence already. That puts us susceptible to inhibiting our immune system. But with that blood sugar response to stress, we often then get an overreaction of insulin, and that can drive hypoglycemia or low blood sugar. And then we go for the snack and the pick-me-up, and we, again, eat more frequent, eat too much refined carbs and too much sugar. And independent of the blood sugar roller coaster, we see that refined processed carbohydrates actually inhibit our white blood cell production. That can really interfere with that initial innate immune function, because that's where all of those armies of defense for our body are viable in our white blood cell count. So if you're constantly eating refined carbs, that's an added insult. You're disarming your immune system's capacity, and then you're actually taking away some of its chemical warfare, basically, by eating too much carbohydrate. So I'm all about low glycemic. This is a great time to definitely employ a ketogenic diet. And another reason of beauty with employing a whole food approach to a ketogenic diet is then the abundance world that we can get qualitative immune boosting nutrients from our animal proteins. I luckily had just stocked up from, we get a farm share out here. So we do, pasture raised pork and grass fed beef and whatnot. Your animal products are going to have the most potent forms of some of the most important immune nutrients available. So, we're looking at things like vitamin A in a retinoic form, which is the actual provitamin, the actual available one for the body to use. Very important for the immune system. Zinc in our red meats and our myoglobulin, so we're talking about like pink fish, like salmon would also fall into that category. We're looking at, getting an array. Vitamin C would come in your produce primarily. And so getting a good amount of color at this time for antioxidants. We see polyphenols, which are antioxidant rich compounds found in many plants, including tea leaves. Actually, there was a study by Harvard looking at influenza, and they saw people that consumed 5 cups of tea a day had 10 times the amount of interferon, a primary immune compound that helps the body's immune system function. And also polyphenols can inhibit the ability of viruses to replicate. So if you are exposed, again, you want to try to reduce the expansion of the virus in your body and allow your immune system to identify as rapidly as possible and remove it from your body as effective as possible, while keeping those symptoms as least as possible to reserve optimal organ function. Yeah,
I'm a huge fan of polyphenols. Dave Asprey actually has a really good product with Bulletproof called Polyphenomenal, but that's a good name. But yeah, like it's incredible. Not only did they help with like what you're talking about, and you covered, is that they also are vasodilatory.
Yep.
Increasing the size of the blood vessel, but also with that comes better nutrient delivery and better waste removal. and increased BDNF in the brain, so it's anti-Alzheimer's. We see that polyphenols like those in cinnamon and curcumin and some of these compounds lower inflammation and
Right.
blood sugar and glycation, blood sugar damage. They're anti-aging, and they're like so powerful, like anti-disease and pro-health.
Yeah.
It just seems like that class of compounds is definitely something to focus in on in your food and potentially supplements.
Absolutely. And, you know, when we look at the risk factors with age and such, that same population tends to be, of course, not being covered. It's like, I think New York Times put out an article. It was like, we don't know why the elderly are dying from this thing. And it's like, what? It's like, look at the comorbidities, look at the nutrient deficiencies that come with age. And that's your answer. You know, like, look at vitamin C status, and it starts to deplete. I mean, it gets depleted at age 50 onward, but really in the elderly population, we see clinically low vitamin D, we see clinically low levels of vitamin C, we see anemia in a lot of them, we see hypertension, we're looking at diabetes, and so there's this multitude of factors, and then of course respiratory failure, ascites, and the liver, that fluid buildup in the body, and that's where, yes, the cool thing about food as medicine is there's that exact viral influence of polyphenols, which right now is buzzworthy, but you're not just hitting one target, you're getting a multitude of beneficial synergistic outcomes. You're getting belly fat burn. Like, that's an extra sweet thing right now, because otherwise you're dealing with cortisol spill and you're making belly fat during this time. You're increasing your VAT, your visceral adipose tissue. So there's always an opportunity to, you know, get in with an action item that can have a multifactorial influence. And that's where food as medicine and targeted nutritional supplements can be an awesome thing. Like turmeric, it can make your mediocre low-grade inflammation resolve so that you feel less, you know, creaky in your joints every day. But then there's, you know, like you mentioned, it's awesome. BDNF in the brain. I mean, powerful influences that we can see with using natural compounds.
Awesome. Well, you're a rock star. I love this. So I'm going to grab I got a couple questions. Since you are the star, how can I lower my cortisol level? So
I would say you want to kind of determine if you have elevated cortisol first with a, so I didn't mention, I'm the author of a book called The Anti-Anxiety Diet. So, and the Anti-Anxiety Diet Cookbook. And a lot of my clinic and a lot of my approach really works on harnessing the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal feedback that regulates that autonomic nervous system, keeping us either in that sympathetic or parasympathetic space, that fight or flight, which is the stress response, or in the parasympathetic, we used to just dumb it down to rest and digest, but it's so much more. It's metabolize, it's reproductive hormone health, it's your circadian rhythm, it's your cognitive function. So much of anything that requires regulation is in that parasympathetic space. And so what we'd want to figure out to lower your cortisol first and foremost is, do we need to lower your cortisol, or do we need to lower your body's stress response to fire that HPA axis into overdrive mode? Because potentially at this juncture, you may actually be dealing with adrenal insufficiency, where maybe your cortisol levels aren't the culprit. And so we do need an ample level of cortisol to be anti-inflammatory. We do need an ample level of cortisol to battle chronic fatigue syndrome, and also to influence mood. I mean, there's a lot of factors that cortisol plays a role in, and there's a sweet spot. Just like estrogen, we tend to kind of demonize things in the health sphere where everything has a sweet spot. You don't want to have zero out estrogen levels. Not going to be good for your bones, not going to be good for your mood, and all the other things. So I would first determine if cortisol needs to be lowered, and I like to do a salivary assessment. I do a 4-point quartile where you assess at rise, before lunch, before dinner, before bed in general. We can look at that cascade. I would also like to see where DHEA levels are, because we can bring in things like magnolia bark. We can bring in things like phosphatidylserine, and these are powerful compounds that can be helpful, but they will mitigate cortisol release and excess cortisol, which you may not want to suppress. You may do better with something like ashwagandha, which is an adaptogenic compound. You may do better with high-dose vitamin C, especially at a time right now, especially one that has a bioflavonoid blend with, I never say it right, hepsaparin, which is a compound in
Hesperin.
hesperin. Thank you.
Hesperin.
Rutein, quercetin,
Yeah.
hesperin. And we just saw the connection with ACE2 inhibitors and that viral spire connection, where that bioflavonoid can be very powerful on that ACE2 inhibition. So potentially doing a bioflavonoid blended vitamin C would be a big tool right now. And that's going to help your body to regulate cortisol as opposed to suppress. So that would be kind of a big picture. Is I always start with adaptogens and maybe a blend with a little bit of nervine herbs, which could include things like German chamomile. We've also seen really cool skullcap, which is a Chinese herb, which has great respiratory support for the body. So a lot of these adaptogen and nervine herbs with stress responding nutrients like vitamin C and B vitamins would be powerful. And then I'd probably go more amino acid focused, like L-theanine, which is going to help with our alpha brain waves, aid with concentration, focus, creativity. That's what's seen in our REM cycles of sleep. So it can allow us a focus with a relaxed approach without driving that cortisol. And then I would bring in magnesium bisglycinate, which actually can cross the blood-brain barrier, and that actually can downregulate ACTH from the pituitary. So it actually works as like a bodyguard to block in that HPA axis where the pituitary in the brain is stimulating those adrenals. It actually can help to kind of block that stimulation pathway. And then there's other beneficial supports of magnesium, again, neuromuscular release, and we burn through magnesium with stress.
Yeah, and that's my favorite form of magnesium as well. I'm a huge fan, and I love the adaptogens. I agree, that's a great place to start. I like to cycle through them, like to use like rhodiola for a couple months, then an ashwagandha for a couple months, or something like that. But yeah, I love that same approach, and I'm a fan of magnolia bark as an anxiolytic. So that's great advice. We got a question on liposomal vitamin C, which I'm a fan of, but I don't know if you want to speak to that. But to me, that's like one of those things that like there's you can have GI distress at higher levels of ascorbic acid, and it's a way to kind of bypass that in lieu of not being able to do like IV vitamin C, which is very effective.
Yep. I would say same, there's IV liposomal, and then there's vitamin C blends. But I would say that the novelty of the bioflavonoids in this scenario would be worth strong consideration, and potentially using both. And then, you could ramp up with the liposomal if you start to be symptomatic. Because bowel tolerance is usually the biggest inhibitor to get to a dose above 2 to 3 grams. And there's very buffered forms. There's very things that we can do trying to aid intolerance. But that's where liposomal will be superior in both the bioavailability, meaning delivery and utilization in the body, but also the less side effect on the stool softening.
Perfect. So I'm immunocompromised due to lupus and kidney transplant. What else can I do to protect myself aside from social distancing?
So I would absolutely ensure that I would recommend an adaptogenic blend for certain, and try to look into the formulas, like I said, that have other compounding factors that could be supportive for virus, which most are actually. It's very interesting. Cordyceps has fantastic research on it. So an adaptogenic blend would be something strongly to consider. I'm not sure with the kidney transplant if there are any other medications that we would consider, because a lot of herbs, of course, do have a little bit more interactions to be mindful of. So I can't really say that across the board. I would absolutely, I put all of my transplant patients on probiotics, and I would absolutely do at least one of them a like 50 billion to 60 billion CFU 50-50 blend lactobifidose strain. And then I would even further consider one that has more diversity in it as a secondary probiotic, because this is the time to just really ensure that you are getting that immunological support. And on that vein, you could also work with grass-fed whey that's non-denatured to get immunoglobulins. This is going to be a great way to ensure that your already compromised immune system has the tools, the support of the GALT, the gut-associated lymphatic tissue, but also actual live globulins from that non-denatured whey to help your immune system's army of defense.
So what do you think, specifically going back to that, like, you can get specialized, sometimes expensive, colostrum blends. What are your thoughts on that?
I think great. I think I use colostrum with all of my patients that have secretory IgA levels that are severely compromised. So I always will start with actually a formula of like an L-glutamine and a DGL blend and something that has that ulceration support and kind of leaky gut mucilaginous herbal with the L-glutamine support is always my first line of defense. But then
and DGL is the licorice extract.
Deglycerized licorice,
yeah.
right? Which that form doesn't have the ACE2 element. It would have to be the glycerized form. Yeah. So then I go to colostrum as the next line of defense. But on a daily level, and again, kind of taking the mom perspective for kiddos, a non-denatured grass-fed whey would be a really good support on a foundational level that would be more cost affordable. And then that colostrum would be used more in this example of like an immune compromised individual where that investment is really necessary. And then absolutely, I think vitamin D, needs to be discussed.
Yes.
And that's what's, we're not, it's blowing my mind because I was trying to find, and I'm like dancing between the geek out of knowledge and trying to stay present and whatnot. But I swore that I saw something about intramuscular injections in China right now being used in hospital systems with high dose vitamin D and also IV vitamin C. And then I couldn't find the source. And I'm like, maybe it was in a dream. Maybe it was in a dream and it was my, but have you seen that?
Absolutely. There is data coming out now specifically with these, the COVID-19 and the other coronaviruses with MERS and SARS that the push of ascorbic acid is very effective, whether IV or IM. There is data on that for sure, and I've been reading that as well. So I'm going to employ that technique with some liposomal vitamin C, and I already do a D3K2. And I might see if I can even, pop into an IV clinic and get a 25 grams is kind of the hefty cancer dose of an IV push. And doing that maybe, once or twice a week for, this next couple of weeks could be interesting. So that is an approach that you could do.
That's what I saw was 20, at least again, I swear I saw it, my eyes saw it for a moment. And, we in the household always pulse up vitamin D during any time of immune stress. So even in kiddos, my daughter's just shy of 40 pounds. She's 3.5. And so we're now upping her baseline of 2,000. She's getting 2,000 IUs a day instead of 1,000. And then about 3 weeks ago, who knows what she had, but she had like a 104.5 fever. She had a pretty gnarly deal. It was out for like 4 or 5 days. And whenever anything like that hits, where we're getting significant symptoms, whether it be anything, that's a time to pulse up. And I always say quadruple or 5 times your vitamin D base for about a 3 to 5 day window. And 5 can be efficacious. And it's interesting. We have so much fear associated with toxicity, but that's really non-concerning to me on a clinical level. So that's where I go. I go 5,000 I use as a baseline. I do a K1, K2 blend. And I'll go 20 to 25 for 5 days if need be, and it always kicks it. Always works.
Agreed. I love that blend as well. There's some people here mentioning CBD and also mentioning just smoking marijuana.
Someone's really committed to making that point.
Which, I get, I see. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Aggressive.
I get it from the de-stress. I'm not really a big marijuana person specifically, and I do use CBD, but it's definitely, I get like the de-stressing, and I think you're probably going to see people rely more on marijuana and alcohol and things right now, and I get from a certain perspective trying to reduce stress. I mean, some people are very panicked right now. I mean, what are your thoughts around relying on some of these compounds that may be potentially counterproductive to health, but like short term, makes sense. What are you?
I think that stress reduction is really important. But I think that, element with smoking weed would be very concerning in the sense that this is a respiratory infection. This is
Right.
primarily
100%.
respiratory based. So I wouldn't recommend that.
Yep.
But potentially I would recommend a full spectrum tincture. You know,
Yep.
I truly believe that marijuana is just another plant medicine. So, you know, then there's legal elements and politics. And that's a whole long conversation. But I would say, as you know, my healthcare, my own personal thing, I would say, yeah, plant medicine could be appropriate now. And I'm less concerned about, I don't really have any concern of a full spectrum tincture, whether it had primarily CBD with a little bit of active THC or whatnot. We do tend to see in research a beneficial outcome of the synergy. If you're in a state that can only do CBD, that would be okay. And there still is immune modulating influence of cannabidiol. So I think that could be very appropriate. I'm not concerned about endotoxin, to be clear, with marijuana as I am with alcohol. I don't see any concern unless we're creating that oxidative stress of, again, inhalant and burning and combusting. So it's the concern about the toxicity of extraction of the plant matter, but that's with every single plant medicine. You know, how is it extracted? Was it moldy? What was the sourcing? And all those considerations apart, I wouldn't have a concern. But alcohol, I would say, yeah, I was just going to reflect and share my stories. Like, I think I'm drinking a little more wine. And I have to be honest and say it's true. But is that a healthy support mechanism? I don't believe so. I mean, at least I'm getting my polyphenols in.
Yeah.
But I mean, alcohol is an endotoxin, and that would be one that I would say, especially because there is liver kidney influence, that this would be one that we'd want to be mindful of.
Yeah, and that's such a great point before too about the respiratory aspect, because they've shown that that increases the risk. Obviously, COVID-19 is largely a respiratory illness, and it seems like interesting when you compare it to influenza H1N1. Like it's in a lot of ways not nearly as bad. Like, but it seems like with COVID-19. It's basically has no effect on people under 19, seemingly.
Right.
That it's less severe for people that are of a healthy age, and it's more severe for people that are elderly, that have respiratory illness, or that are immunocompromised. It seems like, so it's like the numbers, depending on where you look, are very skewed, and I think that's not being kind of compared like side by side, that it does seem worse in certain populations, but it's also better or almost non-impactful on other populations.
And I don't know about the elderly population in China as much as I do in the US, but what I would also call out as a really significant influence is the iatrogenic impact in the elderly, meaning the medication influence. And if we're talking about how many of the elderly are on, for instance, a statin drug, and the influence of low LDL levels and that impairing our immunological function, I mean, that's a really significant factor. Or proton pump inhibitors being a driver of mineral deficiency in the body, and those individuals likely being low in zinc. Or those individuals not eating a nutrient-dense diet and eating a lot of refined carbohydrates. I mean, it's just, again, there's so many. And that's what's very frustrating to me, is that I don't feel that we are disseminating information that empowers people to make wellness-based choices. And I think that if we could unpack and personify the people that are at risk and actually identify the variables that are lifestyle-oriented, that are, again, nutrient deficient oriented, that would, I think, let people feel a little bit more empowered or in control, versus this idea that there's this pandemic that they're going to grow a fourth arm out of their head, you know. And I mean, that's like literally the level of it's not being discussed as something that the body's capable of eradicating. And yes, it is in some sense when they show the statistics, but it's not, that's like a very grayed out underlying story of this, is like, oh, and your risk factor of mortality is very low. And you may not even know you have it. And so that's, I think, is really concerning.
Those are great points. And one thing I want to kind of add on to that, like you mentioned that up to 70% of us may get this coronavirus. And it's a question of more of like, how do we improve our immune system, and knowing like that we've been talking about, and also knowing that if we get exposed, we can build antibodies to it, and we can improve our immune system to it. And people are making it seem like it's like contracting HIV or something that's like a lifelong disease. And people, if they hear that someone has had it in the past, or, it's like that someone's like a permanently diseased, leper that you want to stay away from for the rest of their life. And, this is going to create more, unfortunately, like ugly behavior, like racism. And, I've heard about in Italy that all the Chinese people that are in Italy are getting spit on and attacked. And, it's just terrible behavior sometimes that can come out. So I just want to make it clear that, this is something like having a cold or a flu, and those things can kill you if you are immunocompromised, especially if you're elderly, have respiratory issues, etc. But, most of us will survive and get better, and our immune system will improve, and you will build up antibodies to these kinds of conditions. So I just want to make it clear that it's not this interminable disease that will haunt you for the rest of your life.
Right. And I think the note you just said on the acquired element of, your immune system is able to learn from this, and that's the idea. I think when we think of symptom management, I'm hoping that this creates an opportunity for us to move the needle further to, self-care, well-care, and being proactive with our health, and maybe taking our health into our own hands, because maybe we aren't getting the answers from the media. Maybe we aren't getting the answers from the greater medical community, because we're just obsessing about, again, the quantitative data, testing. Oh no, do I need to get tested? It's like, what the actual.
Well, and what worries me about testing specifically too is, like, to your point, that most of us have had it, will have it, or do have it, that as soon as these tests come out, we're going to see 10x numbers that are going to blow people's minds and really scare people. And then I worry that there'll be looting and shooting and, craziness that happens. And so I want to just do everything I can to reduce the fear and, try and create some normalcy around this and positivity, and knowing that, again, like, fear hurts not only the people around us and, creates an environment that is unfriendly and can create chaos, but two, it weakens our immune system. So we need to do things to reduce our own fear, and just know that, we'll get through this and it'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, so we talked about the fear and cortisol connection and a little bit of that kind of feedback loop, but on a nutrient level, like I said, vitamin C is stored in the adrenals, tiny walnut-sized glands, and the most concentrated vitamin C is found in that area. So if you're depleting your vitamin C from your cortisol metabolism and that stimulation to that gland, that's going to inhibit your body's ability to combat virus. We also know glutamine, which is, we see glutamine in research when we're looking at slaughter and the tenderness of our meat. Glutamine is greatly depleted with anxiety and fear. And again, glutamine is a fuel source and a building block for our enterocytes, literally our gut lining, which houses our gut-associated lymphatic tissue. So there's so many mechanisms of connection of how fear and anxiety can interfere with our body's host defense mechanisms, and they can be nutrient, they can be hormonal, they can be neurotransmitter imbalance. Epinephrine in chronic elevated levels can interfere with so many immunological processes, as well as vasoconstriction. I mean, there's just a multitude of factors. And so, yeah, I think that if you just can get back to the primary foundations of getting in probiotics daily, supporting your gut with a form of, whether it is bone broth, gelatin, collagen, all of them from biological sources would be important. Yes, it does require an animal, but that connective tissue support is bar none. And getting that L-glutamine, very important now, especially if you are under stress. If we can support, again, getting ample protein, because we require protein for immunoglobulin formation, which is what our body needs. And so we're talking about, women getting at least 70 to 80 grams, men getting 120, or at least, somewhere in that bank, give or take. Ensuring that your kiddos are eating protein at least twice a day. And then that produce variety, we should be in pretty good shape. And then there's things that we can adjust and tweak. But allowing the body to do the work and just monitoring and supporting with natural compounds is often going to be a more favorable approach. You know, when we let my daughter run her fever, I put out a big thing about why we don't use Tylenol in our house to cut fevers, especially like post-vaccine, because, you know, that impairs glutathione production in the liver. And
so sorry, to that point, Katie that works with me on my team said, I've heard that NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, shouldn't be used with coronavirus. What do you recommend instead to manage fever for children or adults? And I have seen, to your point, this data specifically about ibuprofen and corona actually, being counterproductive. So what are your thoughts along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I feel that across. I mean, so Tylenol, acetaminophen is the glutathione element, but then when we're looking at NSAIDs, you know, I mean, even boogers. I'm forgetting. NSAIDs have been noted to increase heart attack. NSAIDs are known to influence vascular function in an unfavorable way. You know, NSAIDs also suppress the inflammatory cascades that the immune system requires to battle. So
the COX-2 enzyme,
COX-2 inhibition, right? And so you know, why are we? And yes, turmeric works on both COX-1 and COX-2, but the mechanism of action is slightly different. And again, you're getting that synergistic effect of phytocompounds that actually can enhance antiviral activity. And you're not getting that with the ibuprofen and the Motrin. And I mean, fever is just one mechanism of inflammation that your immune system is using to battle. And so when you kind of suppress that because you're fearful of the number on your thermometer, you are suppressing one of your body's innate immune ability to battle.
Okay, so yeah, that's amazing. We had a question about fasting, and there is some data on fasting and the immune system, and then you talked about that, but like how long, there's a question about how long it's okay to fast. Thoughts on that? So and again, I think it just depends on your, you know.
Allostatic load, for sure. I mean, I think the biggest thing to focus on now is not eating too frequently, not being a grazer, being mindful about your mealtime. And like I said, like a 16-8, you know, you could do a 1 to 3 day fast. I'm not a good candidate for that personally. I run really low leptin and I'm low body fat. And if I do that, I won't sleep. Right away, I go high adrenaline and my leptin tanks and my body goes into survival mode.
There's a ton of factors to that. And I've been writing on this, and just from my kind of correlative data, I would say if you're a woman and you're premenopausal and you're under 15% body fat, do not do an extended fast.
And if I'm Hashimoto's hypothyroid, you know, I've got a lot of factors, and you've leptin receptors on your thyroid. So there's a lot of things that I would just say take an individualized approach, but I don't really think that this is a time to do anything dynamically radical, but you can absolutely layer things on. But, you know, don't do a fast and cold water temperature and, you know, XYZ all at the same time, because your immune system is going to say, what the heck? What are we trying to survive now? What's she going to throw at me next? And so, you know, you want your ability, your terrain to be able to respond if it is going to see exposure, which
And there's a question from my friend here that said, thank you, Shawn. Yes, I want to know what it'll be like if I get it, either symptomatic or asymptomatic, and then will most people ultimately get the virus? And like we said, I think most people have either had it, do have it now, or will get it over the next few months. There's a high likelihood. But you know, what it feels like, you may get, I mean, it just depends, symptomatic or asymptomatic. If you're symptomatic, it would be, I think if you're a younger person, it's not that extreme. It's going to be a fever, achiness, fatigue, respiratory tightness, like shortness of breath, maybe some phlegm, you know, that kind of thing, and, you know, some coughing and some discharge, but like, it's not as much like sneezing, for example, those kinds of things. So that's again, where the whole respiratory effect comes in. But and
I was gonna say the synergy of food again. So it's like you're drinking your bone broth for that L-glutamine, but you're also getting N-acetylcysteine in there, which is fantastic for white blood cell production and fantastic. I mean, acetylcysteine is what's used in bronchitis medication. So we're talking about working as an expectorant. So powerful to support the respiratory system. And that's just a really cool element. So that's what I'd say is, yeah, thinning your phlegm and mucus can be supportive. Getting natural expectorants like ginger is a fantastic one as well. It's a great time to add, fresh ginger tea. Again, the black tea is fantastic, as is green tea with the polyphenols and the 𝐸𝐸𝐳𝐵. And a lot of spicy peppers can be very beneficial as expectorants. Things that work to support your body in breaking up phlegm and mucus is good, because you want to mobilize so that your immune system can eradicate. And that's the connection of also like the dry nasal passage. We use 𝐸𝐧𝐝, and I'm flying to Hawaii next week with my family, my 3.5-year-old, and we're solid. Like, we feel like we have our kit, we have our deal. And we use 𝐸𝐴 before and after flights always anyway, just because you're sharing airways, and that again mobilizes and keeps things moisturized. And it has a little bit of grapefruit seed extract and xylitol, which is bacteriostatic. So you're getting a little bit of additional support there in case you are inhaling something that would be a risk factor.
Yeah. So with all my autoimmune issues, I have Epstein-Barr, Hashimoto's, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and we've talked about some of those things. I have found some of my kind of immune system boosters that have worked for me. L-lysine is super cheap, and it works for me. I have to take a higher dose. Like, if I feel my immune system crashing, it might be like 5-6 grams or something, which is a decent amount. So it's easier to get the powder. And AHCC, it's active hexose correlated compound. It comes from like reishi and shiitake mushrooms. It has a lot of data with cancer and autoimmune issues. It's expensive, unlike lysine, but it works really well for me. And I've found that there's so many compounds coming from mushrooms. Like, if you look into like the beta-glucans or the 𝐅𝐢𝐧𝐝, there's a small amount of an amino acid in there that's an immune system booster. And you're mentioning cordyceps, and we look at reishi and shiitake and turkey tail, and all just on and on. There's so many mushrooms that seem to have a potent effect on our immune system, and all these compounds we keep finding out about. So those are definitely interesting to look at. And I do use probiotic. I also use what's now called a postbiotic with butyrate, which is, like if you do carnivore specifically, or you get deep into ketosis, butyrate and beta hydroxybutyrate, play certain roles. But obviously butyrate is powerful for gut health and immune health. So I use something called tributyrin, which is a unique form of butyrate. But like most of the ones you mentioned, like the vitamin C, glutathione, or N-acetylcysteine, oregano oil is one I'm a big fan of. So those would be, and elderberry is definitely popular and has a long history. So those would be some of my top ones. What are some other ones? And we talked about colostrum and whey. What else would you recommend?
I have a blend of called Herbal Immune, which is oil of oregano, thyme oil or thyme compound, lemon balm, as well as sage. And so a lot of those also, again, expectorant herbs, antiviral, antimicrobial, have been shown in research to reduce viral replication, also reducing adhesive effect of virus. So all really powerful. And those tend to be more in the upper respiratory system. Beyond using those, as something that you're taking as a compound, this is also something that you can consider in your home with essential oils and using your diffuser. I like to keep those types of oils like in my shower, and I'll dab them on the shower wall so you get that hot, moist air into your lungs and deep into your nasal passage, all the way into kind of that ENT space and into the lungs. Helps when you sing in the shower as well. But great ways to kind of get that deep into that space and can have that function. So that would be kind of lifestyle as well as supplement. And then berberine has a lot of antiviral support. I haven't seen anything specific to COVID, but looking at blends out there that also have like a TCM blend that would have maybe ginger, or my berberine boost has, for instance, the licorice, which has been shown with ACE2 influence of how the virus is getting in, as well as cordyceps, as well as skullcap in there. So you're getting a little bit of multifactorial support on an herbal level, both in lung support and antiviral, and that angiotensin receptor function, which is likely the entrance of the virus, as well as getting that just broad spectrum Oregon grapefruit antiviral effect. And immune support. And then the again, synergy effect is it's an oral hypoglycemic. It aids in, lipid regulator. Again, there's just really cool stuff when you add something that works upstream versus just one thing that you're trying to block a particular single mechanism, and then that interferes with how the body functions because the body doesn't understand how to use it. Or it works on a receptor without working upstream on a mechanism. And so it just a little bit of approach there that's where I'm just such a huge proponent of natural compounds and food as medicine, because you get such cool stuff. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, this has been amazing. So just wrapping up,